Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. On today's episode, we have a huge autism and OCD advocate, someone who really can help us understand what OCD truly is and how it overlaps with autism. This is someone who has two children and decided that with those two children who were navigating challenges such as ADHD, autism, and executive functioning, there was never going to be a stopping point. Jan Stewart is on the podcast today, and she has done great work in the advocacy sphere so that everybody has a better understanding of OCD, autism, and ADHD. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. Today, we have the wonderful Jan Stewart, who has made such moves in the world of autism as it relates to also obsessive compulsive disorder known as OCD. Jan's journey began as her son was found to have autism, also with OCD, and combined, that led her through a long journey that we're going to discuss. But it also equipped her with the tools that have shaped and supported so many others that have gone down this road, whether they be family members or professionals that are trying to support these individuals without enough knowledge in those areas. So, Jan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I just wanted to start off. I know that you've been doing a lot of work in the sphere of autism advocacy and also the OCD world. Would you like to share some things that you've been doing recently, and what are some things that really stand out to you in terms of recent experiences?
Sure. Well, it's wonderful to be here, Sharon. Thank you. So if I back up just to give you some context, if that's okay, before I tell you what I'm doing now.
Absolutely.
I have two kids, Andrew and Ainsley. Both of them are grown now. They both have multiple complex mental health and neurodevelopmental challenges. So Andrew has been diagnosed autism, Tourette syndrome, OCD, ADHD, anxiety, learning disabilities, and disabilities. The umbrella.
Right.
Ainsley, who's just about 2 years younger, has severe ADHD and executive function deficits, high anxiety. She's on the spectrum, and mood and anxiety disorders. So it's been quite a journey from almost the time they were born, and I know we will discuss that.
Yes.
But it's been an endless roller coaster and continues to be, even though they're grown now. They're just different stages at each time with new challenges.
Yeah.
And there's some fantastic highs that give me a lot of pride and awe. And there's some terrifying lows with nonstop compulsive rituals, with raging meltdowns, as just one example, with the inability to complete any task because of executive functioning deficits. And it goes on. But it's their journeys, even when they were young. Once we were able to get help, and we'll talk about that journey because that's a complex one in and of itself for not only me, but for many parents and caregivers and families. And their journey propelled me into advocacy, both for mental health and neurodiversity. So I've served on about 6 or 7 different boards. These have included being vice chair of Canada's, because I am in Toronto, Ontario,
Yes.
Canada's largest psychiatric hospital, which is world-renowned and a really fantastic place, CAMH. I have served on the Parent Advisory Council at Massachusetts General Hospital's Department of Neuropsychopharmacology. I have to practice saying that one.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Many syllables in that as a speech
Exactly.
pathologist. Yeah.
Number of other boards. I started the parent support group for OCD years ago at our children's hospital, Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, which is also world-renowned. And currently, I am the chair of Carey's Place Autism Services, which is Canada's largest autism services provider, as well as the incoming vice chair of the about-to-be-formed, we haven't quite gotten our full government approval yet, but we're close, the Canadian OCD Foundation, which is an affiliate, obviously will be an affiliate of the international, the IOCDF.
OCD. Oh, wow. Well, that's breaking news then because you haven't gotten approved
That's
yet,
right.
but it's in the
We
process.
expect it to come fairly soon, but we're
Oh,
already planning, so quite
that is
exciting.
fantastic. Wow.
So
I
I think
mean, yeah.
that's the governance side. I think at the same time, I worked on Bay Street, which is Canada's Wall Street equivalent throughout
Yeah.
my career. And when COVID came, that kind of came to an end. And I thought, what am I going to do? I'm not ready to retire. The advocacy that I've done through the years has led so many parents and caregivers to reach out for help. And I vividly remember, Sharon, being in their shoes, frightened, frozen, feeling isolated and alone, not
Mhm.
knowing what to do or how to do it, terrified about the future. And having been in those shoes, I said, I want to give back. And so I wrote my best-selling book, Hold
Yeah.
On Tight, which came out almost 3 years ago in March. And ever since then, I write for a number of magazines, from Autism Parenting to Today's Parent to a lot of exceptional needs. I speak I speak to many, many conferences. I'm available for anyone who needs advice from a lay point of view, a parental caregiver point of view, not a professional. I want to stress that. And then I love speaking on podcasts.
Well, it's so interesting because I actually originally found you, even though we have spoken
Mhm.
before, I found you originally through the NOCD podcast.
Okay.
Not NOCD, sorry, Stewart
Yeah,
Ralph.
yeah, I've done both. I've done
Yes.
both. Yeah,
The OCD stories, and OCD
right.
sponsors it. But yeah, and that's where I first heard you because
Mhm.
I have my own experience with OCD as
Right.
well. And it is definitely a battle and a struggle. And one of the things that I was made aware of very quickly when I started working as a speech and language pathologist with these teens and tweens with autism is that I was able to identify that there were also OCD symptoms, and many others around me weren't necessarily noticing that, which is
Mhm.
why when I heard you speaking, I was just so eager that somebody out there was sharing that there is indeed an overlap at times. And the confusing part for me, and maybe you can shed light on this,
Mhm.
and for everybody who's listening who maybe should maybe take a deeper look at mental health in general, but
Mhm.
especially when it comes to autism and OCD, is how did you know
Mhm.
that there were two factors at play here, that OCD was coming in as well?
Of course, I didn't know at first, but in Andrew's case, it was very clear that he had severe OCD. There were nonstop compulsive rituals. He was able to verbalize the thoughts, but there were also a lot of behaviors that didn't fit into OCD. And yet he spoke, he was social, he had friends. And so, the doctor, as many of us have had this experience, kept discounting anything I brought up and told me
Of
he's
course.
just a sensitive child under a bit of stress and stop being an overly vigilant triple type A parent. Essentially, I was the problem.
Right.
Very, very common. But fortunately, I trusted my gut. And that,
Mhm.
by the way, is the first life lesson and insight I write about in my book, Hold On Tight. It's so, so important. But I think it is very important when I look back for families involved and who suspect there's both autism and OCD to understand the core differences between OCD, which is a mental illness, and autism, which is a neurodevelopmental challenge. In both, the behaviors and symptomology can look very similar on the surface, particularly those what's called restrictive and repetitive behaviors,
Mhm.
RBs, and restricted interests. So let me clarify a little more. RRBs can include repetitively putting toys in order, repeating words or phrases over and over again, continually apologizing, which Andrew continues to do today and sometimes scream, and restricted interests think of as hyper focus on specific areas. It might be city buses or specific types of birds. So those can look confusing and similar, but there are fundamental differences between them. With autism, those RRBs, those restrictive and repetitive behaviors, are soothing,
Mhm.
calming, self regulating. They feel like part of the child, and
Right.
they give the child an important sense of safety and security and predictability.
Right.
But with OCD, as we know, the compulsions don't feel part of the child. In fact, they're in terrible distress and they want to get rid of them. Now, that's the base. You mentioned teens and tweens.
Oh, yeah.
When you overlay adolescence on top of that,
Mm,
it's really it just builds and builds and builds. Our kids have the same raging hormones. When they
right.
reach adolescence, it's every neurotypical kid, but they often face more extreme self-esteem issues because they have a fear of being discovered. They have a fear that they're crazy. They can be shamed about it. They can be bullied, which both my kids have been, really Ainsley more than Andrew. And those peer acceptance at that stage is so important to them that many are just so vulnerable, and it can be a real problem because of their challenges. So it is critical for us as caregivers to talk openly with our kids. That is key. Teens and tweens often won't tell you they want help. They want it. Just assume they want it, even if they don't ask for it. The key is listen. Not always easy for me, but listen. Make them feel valued and understood. And depending on the child, and again, each child's different. Let
Course.
them know they won't be limited by their challenges and that their dreams and aspirations, they can work toward, but it's going to take a lot of very hard work. My husband David and I always told the kids that, and they internalized it, which was great. And
Yeah.
importantly, don't hide or avoid information. I have a big bugaboo about this, especially about medications. If your child is taking meds, please don't call them special vitamins. I understand many parents and caregivers do because they don't want their kids to feel different and they want their kids to take the medications and get the help they need. But the key is to involve and educate them so that once you do that, as they grow older, they gradually become increasingly empowered and they can take more part in their own advocacy and treatment. Both my kids do it today, and it's wonderful to see.
Well, that's amazing because, again, the whole purpose of this podcast is to empower our neurodivergent folks because we know that one day they will be a little bit more independent. Some will be totally independent, right? Some will be less independent, but at least allow them to achieve those aspirations if we can, in listening to what they really want, even if they can't speak. And it's interesting because you followed Andrew very closely, and as well as you did with Ainsley. But it seems like you were able to figure out, even though he was limited by certain things, you were able to figure out what he really enjoyed. And I think it's important to differentiate, like you said, these, what they call the special interests, repetitive,
Mhm.
they used to call them repetitive, stereotypical,
Yeah,
kind of things are not obsessions, right? That's not part of OCD.
right.
These are interests that guide these individuals and they become really good at these areas, right? So, I think it's important also to distinguish that, in OCD, the obsession is something that you are ruminating on. You can't stop. You don't want that. You don't want to think about that. It's not something that's necessarily going to build you up at all. In fact, in many cases, it tears you down. But
Right.
in Andrew's case, so you are a young mom, you have Andrew, you're told, oh no, there's nothing wrong, everything's fine. You trust your gut, you go along, you figure out what's going on. And then what do you do next? And I know that it's in your book a little bit, but what do you do next?
So, in Andrew's case, I just knew something wasn't right, and David knew too. Our guts told us that. So I kept looking and looking and looking. But he was doing well at school, as I said. He was social and all that. And then we were on holiday in the Laurentian Mountains north of Montreal the summer he was 9. And he was happily playing one day, and the next day, out of the blue, for no reason that any of us, including Andrew, could identify, he erupted into a raging meltdown, kicking, screaming, ranting, raving, cussing, punching
Right.
holes in walls
Wow.
for 2 hours. And this continued virtually unabated for months on end. And within 1 month, sudden onset also of nonstop compulsive rituals. He started touching walls repeatedly for hours, couldn't walk through the door for 30 minutes, outside, because as you know, rituals keep changing and escalating.
Yeah.
He would rub his head against shrubs, car tires, um, he got down on the filthy subway floor. I remember being so horrified and tried to gnaw it repeatedly. And at home, he even put knives in his mouth in order to feel them. It was terrifying. And he was in huge distress. So in his case, Sharon, it was so obvious.
Right.
we could then get the help we needed. And then it was on top of that, we also found vocal and motor tics. We found regressive behavior that started with restrictive eating, which still is at case today. He could no longer maintain eye contact, had terrible difficulty with change and transitions. So he was initially diagnosed. This is pre-DSM change of definition of autism with pervasive developmental delay, which is now part of autism.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like, again, with the OCD component, it just came out of the blue, as it always
Correct.
does. One day, somebody just experiences this situation, and sometimes it builds up, over time. But in many cases, it could be just kind of this thing that kind of just comes over you, and you're like, "What is that?" And a lot of times, it takes. And I know that you're very active in the foundation over there in Canada, as you said. Hopefully, they'll be rolling that out soon, the OCD Foundation. But many people don't realize that it could take, I think, on average, 14 to 18 years or more to even
Yeah,
be
it can
diagnosed
take
with those.
many, many years, and
Yeah.
of course, there are many misdiagnoses, a feeling that OCD is just anxiety,
Hmm.
there are all kinds of things, and
Yeah.
you really have to get educated about OCD and realize it's not attention seeking, which many professionals who are untrained will tell families, Nothing's wrong. He's just seeking attention. This bizarre baker." You can't tell them to
No.
stop. That certainly doesn't work.
Nope.
But on the other end, you have to learn once the diagnosis comes in not to enable and accommodate the OCD. So
Yes.
it comes on both sides.
Right.
This is a very serious, debilitating mental illness that causes huge, huge distress. One afternoon, Andrew said to me, "Mom, I feel like I'm going crazy and I want to die."
Aw.
He was 9 years old. And Ainsley, on the other side, with all her challenges, while Andrew was a behavior dream. He
Right.
followed all the rules and he liked to please people. Ainsley was a risk taker and mischievous,
Hmm.
and all kinds of fun until she
Hmm.
started school when she
Oh,
was
dear.
jumping on desks and was rude to teachers and students she didn't think supported her. And she wrote me a note that apologized for being a bad child, but she couldn't help her out of control behavior.
Oh
So
my
this is what
goodness.
our kids often go through, and so imperative that we listen to them, let them know we're on their side, and I promised them I would never stop till I got them the right help, and I keep my promises.
And you sure did, for both Andrew and Ainsley. They're so lucky to have you as a mom. I'm not just saying that, but just even in my interactions with you, you're just so compassionate and you just want to get to the bottom of things as opposed to just saying, okay, we'll treat this, but like, let's not look at that. And I feel like that's a really tough nut to crack, really open, is when there are multiple things going on simultaneously, so many co occurring things. And like you said, there's neurodevelopmental and then there's mental health. And then, wait, how do we address both? So it's really, really complex. And I think that's why a lot of people just don't really know what to do. And in your case, you were actually, because a lot of parents listen to this podcast, and there have been many parents on this podcast, and they had to make a decision of what to do in terms of, oh my goodness, what I expected in my child is not what it really is. And
Mm.
now I'm battling this and I have a job, I have a career. So what do I do? Do I step away from my career? Do I stay in my career? And I'm fascinated because I know you had a really big job to
Mhm.
do, big career, and you did not walk away from it.
Mm.
And it seems like it actually may have served a purpose for you.
Yeah, it did. First of all, I loved my work.
Yeah.
I did executive and board search, and I was the managing partner of the Toronto office of a global executive search firm called Aegon Zender, which is a Swiss-based firm. And it was fantastic, and it saved me. It was life-saving. I don't discount other parents who stay at home. I think I'm in awe of them. I couldn't do it. I'm a much better parent because what work has given me is it separates me from the challenges at home, even today. It gives me perspective. It helps me rebuild my own identity. And it's then I become much, much more patient when I go
Right.
home and can face the world a little better. Right. And remember, of course, layered on top of that are stresses that come with friends, with family members, with your own life partner, with your spouse.
Yeah.
And those two, work was really great. Now, that's not to say that in the worst times and still today, wherever I am, including on this podcast, my phone is sitting by me 24/7. And if either child needs me or if there's a crisis,
That's
they
it.
take priority to come first.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic that you were able to do that, and it seems like you did that even when you were working, when you kept your job. That phone was there. That phone was there, and if somebody needed you, you were there. You were gonna be there. Hopefully, there weren't too many of those
No,
calls,
I
but
mean,
yeah.
there were enough of them, and
Yeah.
there were days where I closed my office door or went into the bathroom and just wept. You
Yeah.
have to. You have to. And then you would regroup and get back into work. And again, what saved me was being able to focus on something else.
Yeah, I think that people sometimes don't understand how work can actually be a saving grace to some, depending on what's going on and the nature of the family dynamic, but so that you're not overwhelmed all the time by the same focus, like you said. And so it seems like also it was something you were passionate. You loved your job, right? You loved
Right.
your career. So it kind of nourished you, filled your cup so that you could have more to share with your loved ones. And
Yeah,
so, yeah.
that does bring up one point that I do want to make. I mean, I've been very fortunate in many ways. I grew up in a warm, loving family, gave me everything I wanted, got my MBA as my husband did, had this great senior career, which has honestly allowed us to afford what the kids have needed. But what I want to stress and what I write about and hold on tight, the insights that I share, have nothing to do with money and being able to afford. It has to do with educating yourself. And it has to say, I'm going to have hope and perseverance and resilience and just keep going. And doesn't matter if you're married or single, if you have financial problems or not, crosses all racial, cultural, ethnic, gender lines. It goes on and on. You just have to keep that hope and perseverance going.
Yeah, and I think that's just such a good motto in general in life for anybody who's struggling with anything. I know so many people are struggling, especially now. The mental health crisis here in the US is over the top. I'm sure in Canada it's not as I mean, it could be just as bad. I think that a lot of people forget about the, persistence, resilience, and our ability to just keep
Mhm.
going, just like you did, just like Andrew did, just like Ainsley did. And there's so much to be said about that ability to just push forward, even though you don't have that certainty of what's going to happen after or what's going to happen later. And to your point, I think that um, many family struggle with balancing this, even
Yeah.
uh, with the spouse. Let's say there's a
Mhm.
spouse involved, you have to get on the same page, right? You have to know that you're going to be
Very
addressing
true.
children in a similar way, right? Or it's gonna be tough. It can make you stronger or it can break, in some
Correct.
cases, families. Was there a certain turning point for you where you said, "All right, we're getting on the same page if we're gonna do this?"
Again, I think I've been lucky a little because naturally David and I have fallen into different roles where
Mhm.
I've always, and I think it's part of how I'm wired, to be frank,
Yeah.
I take charge. And so, in terms of finding the right doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, the right
Mhm.
schools, housing, and to find the right employers, inclusive employers, I've really taken the lead with the kids on that, where David has played an equally important role as the fun parent. So, he was coaches of teams, he's taken them to games and concerts. So, but David and I, it's not a typical marriage, right? It's parallel in many ways because you can't come too close all the time, or at least I find we'd explode. So of course we talk about the kids and we have disagreements and I'm too quick to decide and he's too slow to decide, but we come together. But I have found that those disagreements that so many parents have about medications, for example, can be really harmful to kids because kids have those inbuilt antenna. They know
Mhm.
when their parents disagree. So talk about it privately. Try to come to some compromise. And if you can't, see someone professionally, a counselor or whatever, social worker, whatever works for you. To me, what's worked for us is at our core, we trust each other, we lean on one another, we are equal partners, but we have different roles. And in the end, even though David will do things that I don't agree with, and I think, are you kidding? So I know he's trying his best, and
Right.
I give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's what we all have to do to survive this journey. Now, do we go on vacations together? No. David goes off on golf trips,
Okay.
skiing trips, and I go other things. I play a lot of competitive bridge, so bridge
Oh,
tournaments, but
yeah.
we can't leave the kids. Now, last February, we went on our very first trip together
Oh.
in decades. We went to Iceland just for 5 days. The kids are grown. We had people in place around it, and it worked, but it was pretty scary when we went.
Yeah, I can only imagine if that was the first one in countless ages and then, you're worried about the kids here. And it's also interesting because in your book, Hold On Tight, you're very honest and real about situations that were going on in terms of how you were feeling and what was going on. And I think that sometimes I find that there's this, I hate using the phrase because it's used a lot, but the toxic positivity phenomenon where
Yes,
everybody's supposed to smile and say it's all good and you're barely hanging on. And there's that person at work that's about to just explode because there's so much going on internally, but we're supposed to just smile and say, all is good, all is great. But you went and dug deeper and said, wait a second. There's actually a layer here where some of us are grieving in a way, or grieving the life we thought, or feeling
we are.
very, yeah, and feeling very just a mix of emotions where you love your child, but at the same time, there's so much going on. And,
Correct.
crying at work, there's a lot of tears that are shed. So, is that just naturally, Jen, who you are? You're just a very honest and raw person? Or did you feel maybe that people needed to know out there that, hey, this is a real battle and you can't just nod and smile?
I think it's both, Sharon, to be honest. The key to me is to face what's happening in your life head on. If you don't, it's like OCD. In
Yeah.
OCD, you're
So,
taught to face your fears, right?
right,
It's ERP, exposure and response prevention. The
right.
same thing for caregivers and parents. Face your fears. And that, by the way, also has to do with the future as your kids grow up. It may need supports and you're not going to be around in 20 years. What do you do? So we can get into that. But to me, the key is resetting the expectations for your life. Life may not be as planned for or hoped for in many ways, and you don't have to love it, embrace it, but you do have to accept it. And once you do that, life becomes much more meaningful and fulfilling. And that's exactly how I've approached life. I was on social media for a number of years, both Instagram and Facebook, and the toxic positivity drove me crazy, I'm going to be honest with you. People saying, I wouldn't change a thing in my life. I think, are you
What
nuts?
kind of, oh, that's amazing.
Are you nuts? Who would want their child, my children, have to navigate challenges every day of their lives? Who would wish that on someone you love? So accept it, but you don't have to embrace it.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that because I've noticed that on social media as well, where people, I guess it's because the social media world is glamour a little bit. So things get glamorized. And I feel like even when things are very serious, people can portray it in a way that seems kind of fun and lighthearted, which there's nothing fun and lighthearted about what you went through. Of course, you found meaning and purpose and you found acceptance and you found peace and you love your children. But there's nothing that was fun and exciting the way that it's depicted on social media sometimes in terms of some of
That's
these
correct.
serious situations. And so to your point, I think social media is a very dangerous world for many and when especially when it comes to this because people will look at it and say, okay, well, I guess it's not that bad after all. Like, I'll be okay. And yes, you probably will be okay, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take the steps to figure out what's going on with your child or what's going on with you
Right.
because people are making it look kind of cool or trendy or whatever it is. So props
Yeah.
to
And
you. Yeah, I want to be off of that too. I mean,
yeah,
it's not
mm,
healthy.
it's so important, I think, for us to be realistic. That doesn't mean we don't celebrate successes. There
Of
are great
course.
successes, and there are lots of funny moments, and humor is one of the self-care tips that I
Yes.
shout out about. You've got to not take your lives too seriously all the time. But Andrew, in the last 6 months, has taught me something that I forgot about, and it's really interesting. So Andrew lived in a group home for about 10 years, and then he and we thought he could handle what's called still semi-independent living. So
Okay.
we found him a really sunny one-bedroom apartment just 5-minute walk from where we live. And David and I would take turns, although mostly me, going down every morning, waking him up because he works full time, preparing his meals, making sure he took his medications, that he was tidy, didn't have food on himself, that he made his bed, and off he would go to work.
Hmm.
And I had a really bad fall about 6 months ago that you know about,
Yeah.
Sharon. and
Mhm.
I had multiple fractures, shoulder, wrist, everything,
Yeah.
and I couldn't go down every day, and David had to help me too.
Right.
So we started FaceTiming. We would go down once 3 times a week. David would drive me down and I'd help him, but the
Mm.
other days we would FaceTime, and Andrew thrived, and what it taught me was to presume competence. It's a great reminder. Those are the kind of things we wanna shout out about quite happily, and we should do that. But I think we also don't wanna mitigate the lows for people going through it so that they know they're not alone,
Yeah,
because
I
you hear people saying, "I wouldn't change a thing and my child is"
right.
it doesn't make sense.
I believe that, yeah, I think that people need to also, yeah, celebrate the great moments. Like you said, presume competence, but at the same time, be realistic about what someone needs. And it's interesting because Dr. Robert Nassif, who's a psychologist now and also has his son Tariq, who's now, I believe, in his 30s. Uh, there came a point where they tried everything. They tried to even sleep outside his room, him and mom, and they had to come to terms with the fact and accept the fact that, oh no, we're going to have to make a big decision because our child needs a certain level of support.
Right.
And so, they had placed him in a more residential setting where he could thrive much more because, like
Mhm.
you said, parents unfortunately aren't necessarily going to be around forever. Or like in your situation, you had these fractures and you were dealing with so much and you couldn't necessarily be there all the time. So it sounds like you have done a lot of work in terms of setting up this independence plan of some sort for both Andrew and Ainsley. No, I mean, like in terms of
Yeah,
you,
let me
yeah,
don't call it an independence plan. In Andrew's case particularly, when there's independence, he gets into trouble. He needs protection and security.
protection.
We've
Okay.
given him that protection. Ainsley's a little different. So in Andrew's case, and then I'm going to tell my major counsel to families. When he turned about 21, 22, David and I applied to become his legal guardians. Quite a process. And once it's granted, and you have to make sure, we made sure he agreed with it. And once it's granted, it's a big responsibility because you have to report to the court every receipt, every disbursement, every year. And it makes sense because I don't want a vulnerable individual to be taken advantage of. And that
Of
can happen
course.
financially.
Right.
So we did that. And just this last year, we said, what are we going to do in the future? We don't have any family nearby, extended family. So took us about 18 months, but we found an angel of a family friend who is a finance investment professional who's become a co-joint guardian with us.
Oh, wow.
He's a lot younger than we are. So that continuity. In Ainsley's case, she doesn't need a legal guardian, but she needs what we call, and there are different names for it, a shadow buddy. We call it an ADHD buddy. So
Okay.
that every week I sit down with her and we go over what needs to be done. Let's do it now. And we go over that to help give her that sense of not becoming out of control and overwhelmed, because when she becomes overwhelmed, she freezes and
Right.
then nothing gets done. I mean, both of them have great jobs and they're great at them, but sometimes in the personal life, there's some other things that go on. So that sets up the future. And the kids are each other's best friends, which is
I
wonderful.
love it. Were they always so close? Were they always that close? Like even
Well,
growing
they
up?
fight like cats and
Of
dogs.
course, which
Yeah,
is normal. That means
they
they have a great relationship. Yeah.
right. They understand each other more than anyone else because of what they've gone through and are going through. So my counsel is no matter how young your child is, do two things now. One is start preparing for the future so that you know your options or many of them when the time comes. And then it's less scary and overwhelming. It's again facing those fears now. And secondly, if you haven't done a full financial plan, again, no matter how young your child is, do it now. And if you're not adept at it, find a financial planner, ideally one who's fee-based, who doesn't sell product, and they can help you enormously. And that will give you and your child a more secure versus uncertain future. It's really important.
That is really great advice because I don't think a lot of people think about even the financial aspect,
Mm.
especially when you're in the thick of a lot of these things. It's just hard because you're so laser focused on helping the person in front of you and wanting to have full control. I mean that's what, OCD is all about, full control, right? Just getting circling back to part of our theme, and unfortunately in life there's so many uncertainties. So what better way to support your child than to have some preparation so that financially and also emotionally they can be supported no matter what can happen. So, you've done so much work in terms of the advocacy space, in terms of really fighting not just for your own children, but
Mhm.
fighting for the children of Canada and beyond, right?
Mhm.
And so, it's interesting because I know that you had felt kind of alone in this sphere where people weren't really opening up. People were hiding. They didn't really want to be known as a parent who had a child that may have had some of these difficulties.
Well, yes and no, slightly differently. At the time when the kids were little, I was desperate to find an OCD parent support group, for example, and there wasn't one in Toronto. Today, there are a number of them. And so, again, just all you need is grit, determination, and perseverance. And by the way, when you're in crisis, sometimes you don't have it, and that's okay. But when
Yeah,
crisis lifts,
yeah,
go forward if you have the time and energy and emotional reserves.
of course.
All I did, it was easy, is I approached Andrew's psychiatrist and I said, we should really start this. She said, what a great idea. I'll co-facilitate it with you. She was working at Sick Kids Hospital. The hospital gave us a room. We started advertising it both across the medical healthcare communities, on social media, a number of other things. And it went for a number of years. And it was very, very helpful because to me, finding your community is so important. Many of my friends just disappeared. They didn't understand what was going on, and
Right.
it's scary. And it's a lack of awareness and a lack of education, I know, but they
Yes.
weren't there for me. And even many family members, well meaning, love the kids, love me. But, well, just tell Andrew to sit up straight. Tell Ainsley, stop being disruptive. Those kind of things, not really understanding. So you learn to navigate around and limit your engagement with those family members who are critical, judgmental, or worse, think they have all the answers, right? And
Yeah.
unwittingly, I didn't realize it. That modeled it for Andrew and Ainsley. And today they do the same thing. So we'll smile when we're talking to a relative
Right.
or someone who doesn't really understand, and they'll be telling us what we should be doing. And
Right.
so we try to change the topic. If that doesn't work, we excuse ourselves quietly. You can go into another room and silently scream.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I think people don't really understand. OCD is something I understand because of my own experience, and I can attest to the fact that it can be excruciatingly isolating when people don't understand what you are indeed going through. And you feel like you're alone and that nobody gets it, which is why I think the power of support groups is underestimated.
Right.
And I think it's amazing that you were able to find your tribe because people do disappear and people do lose faith and people do just say, you know what, I'm done. I've been down this road with you before and I don't want to really hear about it anymore. They may not say it, but there are people that I felt in my personal life may have kind of indicated such, but without actually saying it out loud. And
No,
so
it's true, and even more than that, what I found is there's just times when I was in such depth of misery and fear and desperation, I couldn't talk to my friends and family. I just didn't have the
run
wherewithal to
away.
go through. I just needed someone to give me a big bear hug, and my
Yeah.
community does that. They understand it, and we laugh about different situations that can happen. Andrew's totally literal. 2 weeks ago, someone said, "Andrew, you have a heart of gold." And
Oh,
he looked at me and said, "But
I thought
mine
goals.
mine isn't made of gold." That kind of thing can happen. Again, that's that laughter. Or we went to one of Ainsley's friends who had severe ADHD when she was little, and we
Yeah.
found her hanging off the third-floor bedroom window, waving at
Oh,
us
dear.
as we came in. Could have been very dangerous. Luckily, she was safe, but we understood it, and then we had dinner with the family, and dinner with 4 kids, 2 of mine and 2 of theirs, with autism, ADHD, and everything else. 5 minutes with the kids and they're gone. That was great for us. Other
Right.
families wouldn't understand that.
No, they would not. And it's interesting because you have this parent support group, right? And then is there something specific that you learned? Because as parents, I think people forget that when you're the parent, right, there are also strategies that you can use with your loved one. And that's the whole point of the support group. You can share experiences with each other and then you also can share what's working and what's not working.
Right.
Was there anything that you learned, I'm sure you learned a ton, but anything specific that stands out from you from that parent OCD group in
Yeah.
terms of how to parent a child with OCD that also maybe has autism or another neurodevelopmental difficulty?
I think for me, the biggest learning, because I was so focused on helping the kids and doing what needed to be doing, working with the schools in partnership or going elsewhere, working with the medical professionals in partnership or going elsewhere, that self-care was totally ignored. I was just trying to get through the day minute by minute, forget hour by hour. And I
Right.
remember during one of Andrew's horrific meltdowns, just sitting at the top of the stairs, shoveling in spoonful after spoonful of coffee ice cream, Haagen-Dazs coffee. But I didn't take care of myself. I stopped exercising. You're just trying to
You're trying to
literally get
survive,
through the day, right?
like
Survive.
literally survive, survival mode.
And that parent support group gave me perspective and said, no, you've got to take care of yourself. You'll be a much better parent. And taking care of yourself is not only eating, sleeping properly, all that stuff, exercising. It's reaching out for the support you need as a caregiver. It's remembering humor. It's importantly carving out part of your life as your own, away from your spouse, life partner, away from your kids so you don't burn out. So even when the kids are in crisis, I'll take a 10-minute walk by myself or close the bathroom door and run a bubble bath just to have a few minutes to regroup and refuel. But probably most importantly, to remember to be kind to myself. I've made many mistakes and I will continue to. And when I said earlier that David and I were very proud that we told the kids they'd never be limited by their challenges and could dream and achieve anything, that was great. But it was also unrealistic to a point, so that Andrew, in his final year of high school, decided he wanted to attend MIT. Now,
Oh,
Andrew was not a candidate for any college, university, or even regular high school.
right.
And he rightfully resented me for a number of months that I gave
Oh,
him realistic dreams. And it took me a long time to forgive myself.
oh,
Those are really critical lessons. But what you have to do is balance that and say you get up the next day and you brush it off and you start again and you pat yourself on the back for your strength and resilience and know that you are more than enough. You are your child's champion.
yeah. I mean, you really are their champions. You are so dedicated. You have gone into a world of advocacy that is helping so many people. And as it turns out, Andrew may have not gone to MIT. However, however, Andrew is up to some great things right now, right?
Both kids are.
At Ainsley, yeah.
So in Andrew's case, he's had some employers who meant well, but really didn't understand and had no interest in learning. One of them, he worked for a major retailer and he was a cashier and he excelled. And I remember thinking, how is he going to make change? But people helped him and he never was ripped off.
Wow.
People would stay on his line while other cashiers were empty. But new management came in one day and suddenly, without any explanation,
Oh
pulled him
no.
from his job and told him to stay in the back stocking shelves. I knew what had happened. It was needless discrimination. They didn't want an obviously disabled looking employee on the front line interacting with customers. So I went in and took care of it. And in Ainsley's case, was at university and she got a lot of support with tutors and special ed help and stuff and was really working hard. She had to do her thesis in her final year, and she did her thesis on a topic that was very close to her heart, being a sibling of an autistic brother. And the teacher didn't understand and kept criticizing her and wearing her down. I knew she was too vulnerable to advocate for herself, so I went into the dean, spoke with him. He took over her thesis. She got an A+.
Ah,
But those kind of things can be really disheartening. But where are they today? Fast forward. Andrew works at one of Canada's major telecommunications companies in IT. He's been
wow.
there 7+ years and he loves it. The lesson that I learned from other employers was before he even started, we held an in-service education session with his team and his
Wow.
manager to educate them all about Andrew, not just his challenges, his OCD, autism, all that,
Right.
but his strengths and how they could best work together. I asked them to get a job coach for the company as well as for Andrew, which they've done. And in Canada and both the US, there are many governmental programs that have these that don't cost anything for the family. It's the company that pays or the employer that pays. But the key is that word partnership and communication. They work in partnership with me. If anything starts to go off, they let me know so that we can nip it in the bud, work with Andrew, and that partnership thrives, and it works for Andrew too, so that he wants to stay there till he's 70 and be the best employee, not the best disabled employee. In Ainsley's case, she's become the most gifted child and youth counselor in a grade 1 to
Wow.
3 autism class. And no, it's because of her own lived experiences that she is so valued.
Yeah, I mean, she must have learned so much. The fact that she has gone through the significant executive functioning challenges as a byproduct of the ADHD, she
Mhm.
probably can support so many individuals and really see what's going on where others really miss the mark because if you didn't live the experience and you just learned about it, sometimes you just don't know. So,
That's
yeah, living the experience can really be helpful, which is exactly what you've done, like mother, like daughter. You lived an experience and now you have offshooted to help and support so
yeah,
many other people. So, when speaking about these, neurodivergent teens and tweens, and like you said, that's so hard because the hormones are getting in the way, on top of finding your way, finding your path, you're so vulnerable and you're vulnerable really even beyond that. But those years are so critical and people
yeah,
can take advantage. Is there
yeah.
any advice that you would give to families or neurodivergent individuals themselves who are trying so hard to fit in, especially with the pressure that comes with some families wanting their child to have a friend ASAP?
I wish I could tell, well, the key again is as a parent and caregiver is to listen and make sure your child knows they're on their side. But friendships are something that both kids have always struggled with. And in Andrew's case, the world is black and white and he thinks everyone's his friend. He has no filter, and that's okay. Although at some level he knows he doesn't have real friends, but he has older adults tend to be his friends, and people have been very, very kind to him that way. In Ainsley's case, she can make friends, but much more difficult for her to keep them because she can't read social cues very easily, and she'll misinterpret what's said. And she's, as a result, as an adult now, hypersensitive and hypervigilant. So being aware is half the battle, but also not trying to fit in is also important. Be as much as you can who you are. And if it's not good enough for your classroom, for your employer, go elsewhere. And you just have to have that mentality. I'm going to go to a place that values me.
I think that's such an important life lesson in general. I think that people experience all sorts of things, whether it be at work or whether they're students somewhere or whether they have a certain situation they're involved in with a group of people and
Right.
the value is missed. No one really shows appreciation. And I think it's so hard for this vulnerable population at those ages to really understand that, hey, I'm not being valued. Even regular teens and tweens, or even adults sometimes don't even know that they're not being valued. But like you said, it's worth it to wait, it sounds like, and find your tribe. And there was someone on this podcast actually that was my prior student when I worked in that specialized program
Mhm.
for individuals with autism, old school Asperger's, former DSM. And he actually expressed that he didn't really need anybody in terms of friendship or companionship. It wasn't on his radar in those middle school years. It was only until high school that he started interacting a little bit more and started viewing people more as not just people that sit next to him at school. They're not just students, but they can be more than that. So I feel like also it's very hard because I feel like people come to the social piece or the need for maybe the social piece at different times in their life.
Yeah, especially girls. We know there's a lot of masking in
Yes.
autism, and it can be successful, but it becomes much harder in adolescence because of that peer pressure. And then many cracks often will begin to show. Again, it all goes back to find your community.
Yep.
If you're open to it, sibling support groups, peer support groups,
Yeah.
both my kids have done those. You go to IOCDF conferences. There are
Mhm.
tons of people with OCD your age there, and the same with Tourette and anxiety and so
All
on.
of it, yeah. It seems like the again, the moral of the story here is it's hard to do all of this alone, no matter what it is. And
Mhm.
so support from other people, it may not look the way you envisioned it to be. It may
Right.
not be the best friend that you thought you had. It may not be the family member that you wish would be there for you, but there are other people who can see
Correct.
you. You're not invisible and people can see you. Which brings me to my final point. So many things have evolved and you've been part of the evolvement in terms of how society even just views autism and OCD and ADHD, and just in terms of more groups being around and more resources being around. What do you think has been the biggest change in that area? And what do you really hope can continue in this uncertain future?
Yeah, so there's much greater awareness today of both mental health and neurodiversity, but we still have a long way to go. There's no question about it. And some of the pronouncements that are coming out about autism and mental illness are concerning. And we just have to keep shouting out about them because if we don't, that's how misconceptions grow. And so, just as much as you're comfortable, get out there and let the world know that there's nothing to be afraid of. That this has to do with brain functioning and
Yeah.
it's okay. In
Yeah.
fact, it's often wonderful. So it's just life. Every person, every family has challenges, and these are our challenges. Life isn't always fair, but it's what you do about it. To be captain of your own ship as much as possible, then you can keep more in control of the future and more in control of helping your child optimize their lives.
Thanks for joining us on Unmasking Social, where we neurodiverse advocates and those who support them explore how real friendship begins when we start showing up as ourselves. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend, leave a review, or follow me for more conversations that provide information on neurodivergent ways of thinking, communicating, and connecting. Until next time, keep staying social.